Hi, welcome back, Thresholds and Transits. My name is Megan. I'm happy that you're here. Today we're talking about Mars, Mercury retrograde, and the North Node in Pisces, and the system is failing at every scale. So Mars is at 8 degrees of Pisces. I'm going to drink a little bit of tea before I start coughing. Mercury is at 11 degrees retrograde in Pisces, and the North Node is at 8 degrees of Pisces. So all three are within 3 degrees of each other. And Mercury stations direct on March 20th, next week, while conjunct touching the North Node. So on the same day, the Sun enters Aries. That is a threshold. That is a lot of change happening all at once. So which means that's a lot of change that's going to happen in collectively and then in our lives. So multiple things are turning simultaneously at the same degree, and we're going to come back to what that means. But first, the structure of it. So in the Thema Mundi, the foundational world chart, from which Hellenistic astrologers derived all the house meanings, Pisces is in the 9th house, which is Jupiter's nocturnal domicile, home. It's home. The house of philosophy, sacred truth, foreign lands, and people, higher learning, divination, and the collective's capacity to orient itself cosmologically. It is, as Chris Brennan explains in Hellenistic astrology, the house where the sun rejoices, the place of genuine illumination and revelation, the house where what is actually true is supposed to become visible. And Mars is not happy here. It does not belong there. In the Thema Mundi, Mars is happiest in the 6th house, the house of conflict and labor and the body under duress. When Mars occupies the 9th house of the world chart, aggression and coercion are operating in the domain of truth, philosophy, and foreign affairs. So the violence is specifically targeted at the meaning-making infrastructure. It's not at the body, it's at the mind. The oracle, the university, the agreement about what is real. Now, Mercury retrograde is in the same house, and that means the cognitive and communicative apparatus is running backwards in the domain of sacred knowing and foreign understanding. Valens wrote in the Anthology, he described Mercury as the planet of language, analysis, and the transmission of intelligence. Retrograde, that transmission of intelligence is reversed, internalized, or deliberately obscured. In the 9th house of the world chart, the narrative machinery around truth and foreign affairs is running backwards by design. The North Node amplifies and increases whatever it touches. So Valens, again, in Book 3, describes the nodal axis as a point of fate, of what the collective cannot avoid. The North Node specifically draws forward. It pulls towards and magnifies the energy of any planet around it, touching it. Mars and Mercury conjunct touching the North Node in the 9th house means coercion and reversed intelligence in the domain of foreign truth are not incidental. They are the collective's unavoidable pressure point. And this week, the Reckoning the World chart is being pulled forward. And Mercury stations direct March 20th, conjunct that node, while the Sun crosses into Aries. The moment the intelligence turns outward again, and it turns into a new season at the exact degree of the fate point. So whatever was reversed and obscured during the retrograde becomes the thing that the collective carries forward. This is the technical structure. Now let's talk about what's actually happening in the world that the structure describes. But first, I'll introduce myself. My name is Megan. Hi. I am an astrology student, and I love to learn. I love to explore. I love to find connections of things. I love to look through history and connect certain aspects and certain things that are happening astrologically. And it reminds me of this and this and this. Like my brain is one of those murder diagrams, and I'm connecting all things at all times. So when I make the connections, I want to share it. And so I make content and I share that with you. And the best way to internalize something, to really learn something, is to teach it. So that is what I am doing. I also, because I am just a student, I also don't feel comfortable charging for natal readings or transit readings, so I am offering donation-based readings. Now, please, they are donation-based, so they're not free readings, donation-based. Because I do put a lot of time into them, and I know this is something astrologers talk about, is the learning that happens when you start giving chart readings. And I would say my ability has skyrocketed over the last month in being able to do readings and how I am doing them. I'm so grateful for those of you that have come to me. So if you are interested in a natal reading, which is looking at your astrological chart and like the aspects of that chart, and or a transit reading, meaning you're looking at something specific in your life and you'd like to know what are the transits that are happening, where are the planets impacting your chart, and what are good days for things. I would love to talk to you. So you can go to my website, meganriley.eu, and click on the astrology tab. And that has the 2 different kinds of readings that you can sign up for. And I live in Central European time, so you can find a time, but I have them offered all sorts of different. So I talk to people from all over the world, and I'm loving that. So please keep that up. Okay. Let me see what else. Oh, you can find other information on the website, meganriley.eu. Retreats that we're doing, and there's an assessment that I built, and it's all a work in progress, and this has been super fun and has been growing really fast. So thank you for your patience as things grow. Okay, let's get back to the 9th house at every scale. So the story being told in most English language media about this moment is a story about American power, right? Tariffs, trade wars, Iran writing on a missile the missile is dedicated to the victims of Epstein Island. The 4 mine-searching ships that have been decommissioned just in January, and so now the U.S. doesn't have any mine-searching ships available. U.S. citizens dying in detention centers, Minnesota ICE following school buses to abduct children and parents at bus stops. All of these are real. Mars conjunct Mercury retrograde in the 9th house describes it accurately: coercion and reversed intelligence operating in the domain of foreign affairs. But the 9th house of the world chart does not belong to the U.S. It belongs to the world. And the more significant story right now is what is reorganizing globally in response to those things. Canada just signed a $5.5 billion trade framework with India, increasing opportunities with Japan and China. The EU is deliberately constructing trade relationships that root around American leverage. Nations have spent decades orienting their foreign policy toward a particular center, discovering with urgency that the center has made itself unreliable and are now reorienting. The North Node in Pisces in the 9th house is exactly this: the collective destiny pulling forward new foreign alliances, new sacred agreements about who our partners are, new philosophical frameworks for what sovereignty and trade actually means when the old structures dissolve. Mercury retrograde on the node means the old agreements are being reread, re-examined, redone. Not abandoned yet, but just reread. What was assumed to be settled is being examined for what it actually said, what it actually costs, what was always latent in that convenient myth, kept invisible. The retrograde forces the rereading. The changes in gas prices, increased spending, increased gas, 3 billion euros in the last week. The node means the rereading was fated and it had to happen. Iran is a different register of the same configuration. So Mars conjunct Mercury retrograde in Pisces in the 9th house is covert military action. And it's in the domain of foreign affairs with the intelligence deliberately obscured. Pisces as a sign operates in the fog, through dissolution, through the blurring of what was visible and what is hidden. Mars in Pisces does not fight in the open. It moves through the water, through proxies, through what cannot be confirmed until it has already happened. Thousands of potential casualties are framed as posturing, as deterrence, as something other than what it already is. They're casualties. The fog is the strategy. So Mercury retrograde is not incidental here. The obscured intelligence is the weapon. Virginia Woolf, one of my favorite writers, wrote in 1938 in 3 Guineas, and she was watching fascism reorganize Europe, and she asked the question that no one really wanted to talk about. What is the relationship between the man who controls the home and the man who controls the state? Her answer was that they are operating from the identical logic: hierarchy, possession, control, the suppression of autonomous life at whatever scale is available to them. The domestic patriarch and the foreign policy hawk are not analogous. They are the same structure at different magnitudes. The Mar-a-Lago perpetrator and the former Downing Street resident are just as guilty as the now deceased Supreme Leader Khomeini and any normal person that was just arrested for domestic violence. They are all the same. The 9th house coercion and the 9th house reorganization happening simultaneously this week are the same stories. They are the same structural moment playing out at geopolitical scale. What Woolf named in 1938 is still the operating logic. Mars in the house of foreign truth is not only about missiles and tariffs. It's about who has the authority to define what is real. What do the agreements mean? And whose knowledge counts as knowledge? Silvia Federici in Caliban and the Witch traces the historical relationship between the suppression of women's knowledge and the consolidation of state and economic power. The attack on universities, on research institutions, on foreign aid infrastructure, and on the bodies of foreign-born people, these are 9th house targets. The house of sacred knowledge and foreign understanding is being systematically pressured by Mars because Mars in the 9th knows that controlling the meaning-making infrastructure is how you control everything else. Virginia Woolf's argument doesn't stay at the geopolitical level, it comes home. And this is where the transit gets personal. There is a supposed male loneliness epidemic, we hear. This is documented and discussed and real. I'm being a little bit sarcastic. Men in the United States, in Europe, and South Korea, and Australia reporting profound social isolation. So the absence of intimate friendship, the collapse of the relationship structures that previous generations took for granted. The research is unambiguous on the scale of it. The analysis that stops at describing the loneliness without examining it is incomplete. The cause is the same system that Woolf named. Men socialized into dominance hierarchies taught them relationships are transactional, emotional vulnerability is a liability, and that their worth is measured by control, provision, and the suppression of need. That system, built for men for a particular arrangement, the hierarchical household, the stable employment, the social world organized around institutional belonging. Those arrangements are fading. And the men formed by that system were not given the tools to navigate the failure because the system that formed them treated those tools as feminine and therefore disposable. Audre Lorde writes in Sister Outsider that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. The male loneliness epidemic is the empirical demonstration of that argument from an unexpected direction. Men given only the master's tools, of dominance and transaction and the suppression of need are discovering that those tools cannot build the thing they actually require, which is genuine intimacy and reciprocal care and the kind of belonging that doesn't depend on hierarchy. The loneliness is real. The cause is structural. Mars conjunct Mercury retrograde in the 9th house names the moment when the reversed intelligence around that structure becomes undeniable. The narrative that the arrangement was good for everyone, that the hierarchy was natural, that the tools were sufficient, and that the narrative is running backward. The Mercury retrograde is forcing that rereading of the agreement. Now, the 4B movement. The 4B movement is on the other end of the same structural failure. It started in South Korea and spread all over the world. 4B is women collectively withdrawing from heterosexual relationships, from marriage, from dating, from sex, and from childbearing. And not as a personal choice in the individual sense, but a collective refusal of the arrangement when the arrangement is revealed as structurally untenable. Women are doing the mathematics of what the arrangement actually costs and concluding the terms are unacceptable. This is Lilith leaving the garden. In the myth as Raphael Pathé reconstructs it in the Hebrew goddess, Lilith does not leave because she hates Adam. She leaves because the arrangement required her subordination, and she refused. The demonization that followed was the system's immune response to her refusal. The 4B movement is that refusal at a collective scale. In the 21st century, documented in research papers and viral social media rather than ancient texts. Angela Davis, in Women, Race, and Class, makes the material argument that connects the geopolitical and the domestic. The same economic structures that are driving the trade war, gutting the foreign aid, and the deliberate destabilization of global agreements are the structures that made the domestic arrangements of the 20th century possible in the first place. The male breadwinner household, the female domestic laborer, the arrangement that Friedan documented in The Feminine Mystique as the problem that has no name. That arrangement was not natural. It was produced by specific economic conditions, and those conditions are now being reorganized, not gently, by exactly the forces Mars conjunct Mercury retrograde in the 9th house describes. The loneliness epidemic and the 4B movement are not opposite reactions to the same problem. They are the same structural failure experienced when two positions within it. The North Node in Pisces says the collective destiny runs through the dissolution of the arrangement, not its reinforcement. Pisces dissolves. The node pulls towards it. What is happening geopolitically and what is happening in bedrooms and kitchens and the absence of friendships are the same movement at different scales. Mercury stations direct on March 20th at 9 degrees of Pisces, conjunct the North Node on the day that the Sun enters Aries. So a Mercury station is the moment of maximum concentration of Mercury's significations. It is the most powerful in that moment. Mercury stationing direct, touching, conjunct the North Node means the intelligence, the communication, the narrative that was reversed and internalized during the retrograde now turns out again. So what was rethought carries forward as the new orientation. The Sun entered Aries on the same day is the world's chart, midheaven, activating. Aries is in the 10th house in the Thema Mundi, the most public point, the midheaven, the culmination of the world chart. Mars rules that area. The Sun crossing into Mars domicile on the day that Mercury stations direct conjunct the fate point is a ignition. What was reconsidered in the fog turns outward in the most visible house of the world simultaneously. So, more tea. What this means for the collective, the rereading of old agreements that Mercury retrograde forced is about to become public. The conclusions reached in the fog, the new trade frameworks being negotiated, the refusals being organized, the relational reorganizations happening beneath the surface of the visible world. Those turn outward on March 20th into the most public and visible of house of the world chart. Gloria Anzaldua in Borderlands La Frontera writes about Nepentala, the in-between space. The threshold where the old has dissolved and the new has not yet solidified. She describes it as disorienting, as this place where the person who enters is not the same person who emerges. Mercury retrograde in Pisces conjunct the North Node is this collective Nepentala. The reckoning isn't avoided, the threshold that changes what carries forward. And this is not the first time Mars and the North Node have met at this degree. The closest historical parallel that I could find is 1840. And what happened that year clarifies what Mercury stationing direct on the node actually produces. June 1840, in the World Anti-Slavery Convention met in London. Women had been explicitly excluded by written circular months before it happened. And the meeting was limited to quote-unquote gentlemen. And Lucretia, Mott, Elizabeth Cady, Stanton went anyway. So they're female abolitionists from the other side, right? And they arrived as delegates and were sent to the gallery so they could watch. They could not speak, they could not participate, they could not vote, and they could not be counted, but they could watch. So they walked home arm in arm after the first day, and they resolved to hold a convention of their own when they returned home, to form a society to advocate for the rights of women. 8 years later, that became Seneca Falls, right? The founding document of a women's suffrage movement was written by women who had been excluded from a room where men were deciding the meaning of freedom. This is it. The retrograde forced the rereading. The rereading produced a conclusion, and then the station direct turned that conclusion outward into history. The 4B movement carries the same structure. So do the trade frameworks being quietly built around the unreliable center of the U.S. So does Virginia Woolf's refusal to sign the petition. None of these fix the patriarch. They are what gets built when the room makes itself irrelevant. The node at this degree offers the clarity that arrives when you have been excluded long enough to understand what you actually need to build. One more time. The node at this degree offers the clarity that arrives when you have been excluded long enough to understand what you actually need to build. Virginia Woolf ended 3 guineas with a proposition. She will not sign the petition against fascism because the petition does not address the root of fascism. She will instead name what she is actually doing. She is refusing to rebuild in any form a structure that produced what everyone is now asking her to oppose. The refusal is what Mercury stationing direct on the North Node in Pisces looks like. It's the intelligence that was turning inward, outward again, carrying the conclusion of the reckoning, refusing the reconstruction of what the retrograde revealed. The sun entering Aries makes it visible. What was dissolved in Pisces ignites in Aries, and the threshold crosses. So, 2 questions for you. What's your refusal? What clarity is arriving for you where you have been excluded long enough to understand what you actually need to build? Mars, Mercury retrograde, and the North Node in Pisces, the world's 9th house, under simultaneous pressure from coercion and reorganization. The same structural logic operating at geopolitical scale, at the scale of trade and foreign policy, at the scale of the bedroom and the kitchen, and the absence of friendship. Virginia Woolf asked in 1938 what the connection was between the patriarch at home and the patriarch at war, and the answer has not changed. The connection is that they are the same structure. Mars in the 9th house this week is the description of what is happening at every scale, where that structure is failing and attempting through coercion and reverse narrative to prevent the reckoning from completing. Let it go. Let it go. The North Node says the reckoning is fated. Pisces says it dissolves everything that it touches. And then Mercury stationing direct on March 20th says the conclusion reached in the fog, now turn outward. Here we go.